Hello and welcome to Focus and Foundation. I'm Kelley Phipps with Centerpoint Learning Solutions.
And I'm Tina Kramer, the creator of Simple Learning and the patent pending sound device. Welcome, everybody. All right, so it's February. We're getting ready to move into Valentine's Day. So Kelley and I were talking, and we decided that we're going to talk about having a learning difference in relationships. Relationships can be challenging, whether you have a learning difference or you don't have a learning difference. However, we recognize the fact that if you do have a learning difference, that tends to be a more. So because there is so much misunderstanding out there. So Kelley and I are going to do our best today to raise awareness about some of the challenges that are there so we can understand, because we both believe with education and understanding, we can overcome some of those challenges. So relationships. Okay, now Kelley, you tend to work with the younger ones. All right. What do you see in relationships with the age group that you're working with?
Well, when we have a learning difference, the relationship with other people, it tends to be that feeling of I'm not liked. That person doesn't like me. And I mean that's typical. You get into grade school and kids jump around between their best friends here and there and the other. Right. So that's not really that's a typical thing that happens. But when an individual consistently feels like they're not liked and that they don't belong, nobody will play with me. And when we hear that over and over and over, and as a parent, you're like, seriously? Yes, someone's playing with you. And no, nobody will play with me. And you say, well, maybe talk to the teacher on the playground. She won't listen to me. Right? It's always a no, no, no. And it ends up feeling this whiny, whiny, whiny piece. So what I found is for those individuals, what is happening is that their personal energy probably is not matching the other kids around them. And because we know from chemistry, we know that we want equilibrium. And if you have somebody that's coming in with really high energy, these other people are going to go, ah, right? And vice versa. If the group is really high energy and somebody else is so low, they're afraid of the ball, or they're not willing to gain. And again, it's a mismatch. And that mismatch gives the impression of rejection when it's not the intent, but it is what it looks like on the other side.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. So, if you've been listening to us, we talk a lot about identity of self. And so we're getting into that identity of self to where we don't have an understanding of who we are. And then we also then don't understand how our actions affect others.
Mm-hmm.
And one of those really big ways that we see that stand out is the level of energy in comparison to the people that are around us. That's one of the things that Kelley and I do, is taking a look at that energy, and then how do we help our clients be aware of where others' energy actually is, and then adjust their energy so that they can be more accepted and they can get more of that positive experience that they ultimately are looking for. Now, Kelley, I have heard you say before, usually it's the gentlemen, it's the guys, that they'll come to you when they start to get interested and they want a girlfriend. Can you tell us a little bit about that? What's that look like?
Well, it's when you have to have a certain amount of awareness that I'm not getting what I want. Okay. And in that I'm what I think I'm flirting, or I think I'm making a nice comment, or I think I'm doing such and such, right? But I'm not being received correctly. And again, when that occurs, it has a certain amount to do with personal energy, but more from, I can't take that other person's point of view. I'm not aware of my words. My picture that I have that goes along with the words that I'm using is not standard enough for that other person to be able to receive it. And I know it seems kind of a little off, but when we think about it, the whole purpose of language is to be able to communicate our thoughts and our feelings and our ideas to someone else. And there has to be a standard for all communication for both parties to be able to read that. You know, if you're talking about computer code, or if you're talking about math currency, you know, we know that, like, if I'm traveling, I have to have dollars and pounds. We have to know what the conversion is, and we have to make one be the other, or we can't communicate and work that way. Well, it's the same way with us. We need to make sure that the words that I'm using are going to elicit the same mental image for the person that's listening, or there will be confusion.
Absolutely. Now, when I'm working with my clients, there's a phrase that I use, and I'm like, you got to stay on your side of the fence. So let me explain.
I love it. Yes.
So oftentimes when you don't have a clear identity of self, okay, so Kelley, let's say that you've said something to me that hurt my feelings. Let's say that you said, Tina, you don't look good in red. And I would go, Kelley, that kind of hurt my feelings. Now, the reaction you're going to give is, oh, I'm sorry. You know, I didn't mean to hurt your feelings. Or, well, you really don't. You need to listen to me. Now, those are actually examples where you're on your side of the fence and I'm on my side of the fence, and you're reacting directly to me because you're understanding the emotion that I'm experiencing.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that often happens with our clients is, I might say, well, that really hurt my feelings. And then, and this is just one example of many that could happen. They'll go, well, you remember that time you said that thing to me? You hurt my feelings too. Okay. In that reaction, both people are on the same side of the fence.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That does not work well in a relationship. That does not warrant that give and take and understanding, so that we can really be able to understand each other and then create positive change so we can grow together. So if you ever hear me say that, stay on your side of the fence.
Oh, interesting. Do you know what? So what I think of when you said that, I'm so glad you gave us that explanation, because what I thought of, honestly, is many of my clients literally don't understand where they end and where the next person begins. And so they have no trouble invading personal space. And if they feel like they're close to you, they oftentimes don't recognize that may or may not, not that it's not reciprocated, because that's not fair to say it that way, but that I may have a bubble that is larger than theirs. And if you cross into my bubble without my permission, I'm uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And they don't recognize that. And so when I think of stay on your side of the fence, is keep yourself in your own bubble. Do not.
Yeah.
Right. And in fact, that it was an actual analogy I had to use for a student. And honestly, this kiddo was I would not consider him on the autism spectrum, because lots of times we think of invading people's space as being social awkwardness, and that fits in that. But this is a kid that definitely very busy, ADD all the way, ADHD, and he continually bumped into people's bubbles. And it was, yes, it was energy, but it was personal space bubble, because he was moving so fast that he was not aware of his own space in his own place in space and time. So, so he oftentimes would get in trouble for things that he felt like he had no control over.
Right. And there's it's really not fair. And it's kind of sad how much of a misunderstanding is really occurring. There was a couple that I worked with. I actually started working with the wife before I worked with the husband. And as we started to delve into this identity of self and understand the nuances of not knowing who you really are, she shared a story with me. So it was her husband's responsibility to take the trash out. They each had their chores in the family. It was a large family, and it was her husband's responsibility to take the trash out and empty the trash bins, that kind of stuff. And so she would be like, honey, I need you to do that this week. And he'd be like, I already did it. And she, no, you didn't. Yes, I did. And she said he was adamant. Yes, I did. So it finally got to the point where like these were being huge fights between them about responsibility and about why would he be lying, and she could walk in there and see. So one of the things that I actually had her do was take him in and walk in and see, and she'd be like, you didn't take it out because it's here, it's in the kitchen, it's still. And then his face would go white and he would go, I really thought I did. And he did, okay, but he did in his imagination.
Mm-hmm.
And then we can go back and we can pull out the specific concepts that were missing for him. That in real life, physical world, actually, he had not done it, but in his imagination, he had seen himself go through that process to where he had, and he really thought he did. Yeah. Now, if you're in a situation, especially in being on the spectrum and being higher functioning, so tend to be really intelligent people, but then these type of things pop up. And then if you've got a neurotypical individual, all right, someone that doesn't have a learning difference and they're in a relationship with somebody that does have a learning difference, then it turns into, why are you lying? Why aren't you responsible? Why do I always have to be the one to tell you to do these things? Why aren't you doing it yourself? And then it turns into this big blowout that nobody really understands what's happening underneath the surface. Yeah. And she was right, but he was right as well, based on what he understood. And then, of course, what she understood as well. And so then we moved to a place of a very simple, well, if you're in doubt, you got to walk into the kitchen and look, is it still there?
Right. So Tina, do you notice that the stem to all of these misperceptions is this lack of being focused and present?
Yes.
Yes. And that's the start of being able to build the communication or build or repair the relationship that's been, for both parts, right? For both parties, because neurotypical individuals also need to know how to be focused and present. Okay. It's not a one-sided thing. It's not all of us that are, you have a learning difference, you're off. And nah, everyone needs to know how to do that. And everyone has their own personal responsibility of being focused and present and in the moment. And we all can go off. When people have a learning difference, it's that more. They tend to be there more. And they live there. And so their natural communication style is not the way that the majority of people communicate. And that's what makes them different. But really, it could just be the other way around and say, hello, we're the typical ones and you're different. And in the end, everyone needs to know how to be focused, how to be present. And from this place, we can open the lines of communication and make sure that we're on the same page when we need to be.
Absolutely, because there's a couple things that are happening out there in the world because of a lack of understanding. So the individual that has a learning difference, they tend to, all the problems get laid at their feet. They get blamed. You know, just like the story the story I would told before. I mean, the husband really did have a confusion and we had to figure out how to help him that he could understand. So that's pretty obvious. But then the wife, then I had a conversation with her and I said, you have picked this individual. You've had children with this individual. There's actually love there. So let's take a look at you. What is it about you that has caused you to want to be with this man and to fall in love with this man? And almost always we'll find, just like you said, a lack of focus somewhere, a lack of understanding and identity. Usually, again, we're trends, not absolutes. We find that it's the male that has the learning difference, and then the female tends to be more on the neurotypical side of things. However, she still will have some opportunities. I'm going to use that word. She'll have some opportunities as well. What we're talking about, you know, this is very much part of my journey. I was married at 22, and after I got married, there were some things that transpired in the relationship that was confusing, to say the least. I'm like, what is going on? When I was dating him, I don't remember these things happening. And then we move into that area of masking. Kelley, are you comfortable explaining what masking actually is?
Well, we may have two different views of it, right?
Yes, that's why I'm opening it up so we can see, because our audience may have a very different idea of what masking is as well.
The way I see masking is when we see what we want, we know enough about what we want something to be, that we do everything we need to hide anything that might be seen as less. I don't know how else to explain it, right? And so we take on a persona that isn't us. We take on a persona, and it's to hide what is the real, you know, what's the real issue. For kids, we see the masking behavior come out as the individual that's the bully, or that is defiant, or is you know, you just see the antisocial behavior. And when deep down they're hiding that fear that they have, and they're kind of flipping things around so that people will stay away and not get close enough to see their weakness, right?
Yeah.
It's also for somebody, it's not behavior wise, but could also be for that individual that's really ADD. They use being busy as a mask for their inability to complete things. They're always very busy, very, very busy. So no one ever sees that, really, they're not very efficient.
Yes. Yeah, the masking comes into play because we're usually dealing with very intelligent people. And so they're using that intelligence to watch what others are doing, and then they try to mimic. They try to mimic to be able to hide their shortcomings, and can get quite good at it. Now, let me clarify that we're talking about the more. So, you know, if I'm going to go into a business meeting, you're going to see more the professional Tina, but I'm still me. All right. But if I'm sitting down at dinner with my kids, you know, you got more laid back Tina, and that's just part of being human and who we are. However, if you're doing that to the extent that it becomes exhausting, so in like what Kelley, like what you're talking about with your students, the young ones, oftentimes when they're in school, that, you know, they're masking, they're acting in a way that they have intellectually learned is acceptable. And then when they get home in the evening, you see them just crash because it's so exhausting. And then with adults, we can see, so like in my circumstance, in my marriage, earlier in my marriage, of course, I didn't have any of the understanding knowledge that we have now, and then going to a marriage counselor. So there with the marriage counselor, my husband, he would go in and the language was appropriate. The questions that we were being asked, the conversations that were being had, the language was all appropriate. However, when we would get home, the responsibilities and the actions that should have went with those conversations didn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
So me being who I was at that point in time in my life, started to check the boxes and, hey, you didn't do this and the counselor told you to, and hey, you didn't do that and the counselor told you to. To which he would do, with me telling him, you need to do da 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 da. He would get it done. We'd go back into the counselor the following week. She'd be like, did you do your homework? Did you do what I'd asked? And he would go, yes. Then we would have this very appropriate conversation. And then we'd leave, and then we repeated that process again. The problem in that was I was being the one that was keeping everything moving and everything going on. It was years later, as we continue to have challenges and trying to figure out, to get answers, that I was finally able to articulate when I was going to a counselor. I'm like, well, he did do everything you told him to do, but had I not said anything, none of that would happen.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then we moved in that conversation of the difference between accountability and responsibility. But somebody had to talk to me about codependence because I would do that. And it didn't occur to me at that point in time in my life, I had an option to go, well, I don't want to do this.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. To get to that point of, that as the other person, right, to get to the point of saying, yeah, I'm not going to do this anymore, or I don't want to do this anymore, and to know that you have a different way around it. And I feel like the relationship piece of just for anyone, and more often than not, we know that we naturally attract another individual that is not exactly like us. You don't find marriage partners that are the same. They tend to complement each other, right? My strengths are not my husband's strengths, and his strengths are not my strengths.
Yeah.
Okay. And so that way we can do this. Okay. But the difficulty is it takes a certain amount. I'd like to call it maturity, and I don't know if that's a fair word to use, but it takes a certain amount of understanding to be able to recognize as an individual that my strengths are my strengths, right? And I can't impose my strengths on my partner. And that they're my strengths. That's what makes me me. And that if that individual, if my partner doesn't share my strengths, it doesn't make him deficient. And vice versa. We know that attention deficit and autism spectrum characteristics do go hand in hand, and especially that executive function piece. And the executive function piece is huge. And so many that the wife was able to mask, and these are professionals, oftentimes professionals, they're able to mask that difficulty as they got through college and into their workplace. And so they're a professional, and generally, usually professional individuals are going to probably marry another professional. It's kind of how it works. It doesn't, and so there's a certain expectation for natural executive functioning with that.
Yeah.
Well, when push comes to shove, and when you get home, you're like, wow, I'm wearing that mask all day. Everybody sees me as this wonder person. And I come home and I'm just me, which means I'm chaos, right? And and then there is that counter of an expectation. And I mean, I think that's a whole nother topic. We talk about what that looks like as far as maintenance of a household um, and managing a family and all of the busy pieces and parts that have to do with that. But I think that we're going to see on either side they that where the tensions are going to be different though. They're definitely going to be different.
Yes, absolutely. I've even came across information, so I do a lot of reading, and I've came across information that it almost leads you to believe it's easier when the woman has the learning difference and the man does not. Part of that is our culture and the roles that we play, in that feminine and masculine. Now, don't write a bunch of mail. Don't get upset with me that I said that. But that is a trend, not an absolute, not with everybody. It was interesting for me, way back. I was in my 20s when I was looking for answers. I was going to the marriage counselors. I was seeking out. I knew I was experiencing something different, something more in my marriage, and I wasn't being able to find answers. So I did a lot of reading, a lot of research. I came across a book. I've got this blurry. I think you can see it. Maybe not.
Oh, right. Hold it right there. 22 things a woman must know if she loves a man with Asperger's syndrome. Oh, that's
now this is
amazing.
old. I found this probably 37 years ago.
Wow.
This is, and I love this book. Now, the reason that I love this book, well, one, you can read it in an hour. It's very short. She has very clear cut, some of the challenges that we experience when we're in a neurodiverse relationship. And she breaks it down. That's very simple and straightforward. But the other thing that I love so much about this book in the beginning, she explains the type of person that tends to enter into these type of relationships. And that was the piece that I missed. That was the piece that started me looking into me. And, I was in this relationship that was very challenging, that there were several things about it that didn't make any sense at all. And when I would start explaining, so my husband at that time, he was successful, almost like what you were saying, Kelley, in his professional life, he was quite successful. So then what I was describing the chaos you mentioned, and then people would look at me like, well, that doesn't make any sense. How is he doing the work that he is doing and be that person when you get home? I think the other thing that pops in my head, and we've said this in a prior podcast, you can have dyslexia and be able to read.
Yes.
They don't, we tend to make these assumptions and lump things together that they just don't go together.
Yeah.
They're not absolute. And so then we end up confused and frustrated. And why can't we figure this out? Interestingly enough, as I tell the story, that counselor that I told you back way back that I first started with, she ended up, because it was much later before my husband was diagnosed with having a learning difference. And she actually apologized to me because she said, I didn't understand. I did not understand the more, Kelley, that you and I talk about so much. And there is a more in these relationships. That is our goal in this podcast, being able to have a conversation and touch on that more so people can start to ask questions. And if you're experiencing this and you're like, this just doesn't make any sense, I can't understand, we want to provide for our audience a better explanation of the more so you can seek out the help that you may need. Because it took me a really long time to find people that believed me. Because so oftentimes, if you're the spouse that is frustrated, that is looking for help, you're not believed.
Mm-hmm.
In
Mm-hmm.
your example of the woman that was the executive, can you imagine the chaos that her family may have been experiencing, but when she was at work, what work thought of her?
Right.
Two very different people.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know, it is so hard to be that individual who has the learning difference, who doesn't feel like that there's something wrong with them and they don't know what to do. They just know that their world is not as it should be. They're not experiencing what they feel like they should be experiencing. And what I love about this opportunity to share in this way is to be able to let individuals know on both sides that if you have a loved one that has a learning difference and you are struggling because of that, that there's help that direction. But if you are that individual who feels like their world is in chaos and you don't know what to do about it, things do not have to be complex to provide clarity. And I think that's where we start, right? Is clarity for our mind and our spirit and our imagination, being focused and being present, right? So we have a foundation of a focus.
I think a big part of the neurodiverse relationships that makes them so hard is there's so much a lack of understanding.
Mm-hmm.
If we really understand what we're dealing with, that we see both sides of the fence,
Yeah.
that makes a huge difference versus, well, this is what everybody else does, or this is what everybody else is experiencing, and I want the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I know for me and my journey and trying to find answers and to get help and support, you know, for myself and my family, I had to meet people because in the beginning, people didn't believe what I was saying. They just did not believe me. And that really messes with your head because
Mm-hmm.
then you're like, well, what's wrong with me?
Mm-hmm.
Then I kept fighting, I kept searching, and then started to find pieces of the puzzle. Part of it was as simple as finding a book that described what I was experiencing and that I wasn't being believed. She actually says that in there. Oftentimes you're not being believed. And then that caused me to continue to find answers. And then a big part of the answers are coming from the work that you and I are doing, that we're creating understanding. We're creating these bridges and having these very real conversations that sometimes people just don't even get the opportunity to have.
Well, this is a great topic for February with Valentine's Day just right around the corner or right upon us. So with that, thank you for joining us today for Focus and Foundation. I am Kelley, owner of Centerpoint Learning Solutions.
And I am Tina Kramer, the creator of Simple Learning and the patent pending sound device. Please please subscribe below and send us your questions. Help guide us in what you want to know. Thank you, everybody. Happy Valentine's Day and take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.